thank you for the review. It's important for me to say to the camera that while I take a dim view of much of law enforcement's role in victimless crimes, I'm an unapologetic supporter of Israel and the Jewish people. I wasn't insinuating, I hope you didn't get the idea that I was supporting the assassination of the Jewish people in New York.
No, not at all.
With what I was saying in the book.
What I was seeing, that you had I think you saw with social order breaking down, people are settling scores, and Jews in New York certainly would be target for. You have set up a situation in the series which you haven't really resolved yet, which I assume we'll see in the upcoming books. You talk about the some of the jihadis who initiate these instances. We don't know who they are or what part in the greater world plot that they have, but these are also some of the people who are shooting Jews in the streets. I didn't see you as supporting that. I really see you as seeing in a situation where things break down, there is no order anymore. People will settle scores. These are among those that might be taken.
The assassinations took place before order broke down, and the assassinations took place to take revenge against the people who were supporting Israel.
And this is before the power goes down?
This is before the power goes down, okay. And before nuclear war breaks out.
But I seem to recall there's at least one of them. Isn't one of our we have a female Jewish prosecutor in New York who is shot. That's shot after the power goes down, right?
She is shot when she comes out, and she runs into two anti-Semite terrorists on the street who see her Star of David.
And so they don't know who she is.
They have no idea who she is. They just know she's Jewish, and they shoot her for that. Mm-hmm. And what I wanted to do there was portray just how evil and lacking in compassion for human life or value of human life that this terrorist organization, whatever it is, holds.
I think your series is very consistent in showing this is the world breaking down in a way that is much more realistic than something like The Walking Dead, of which I'm a big fan. And I mention that as for points of comparison because it's such a popular show. Lots of people know about it. It's one of the leading shows on television. It's about an apocalypse, but it's about an unreal situation, which is zombies. Yours is about a very real situation, as you pointed out with the link that you posted, just article a couple of days ago. The powers that be are worried about our fragile power grid, its vulnerability to sabotage by foreign powers or terrorists, and what would happen if the electrical power really went out all over the country and stayed out. And you really address that with an unsparingly, a brutal and unsparingly realistic eye. If social order breaks down, like, nobody is safe. If people want to settle scores, they will.
They will.
And this is but one of many grim realities that we face in your series. Your series also has stuff that is uplifting in a way. It shows people coping with a disaster. It's like, why do we watch The Walking Dead? Because we are rooting for our people, our heroes that we've gotten to like, to survive and to settle and to create a better life for themselves. That's what we want. And in your series, we watch your characters doing that. This is a great place for them to start the scenario that you have built around the life that you know here in Kentucky and around the experiences of your Mennonite and Amish neighbors and friends. This would be you make a very compelling argument for it, that not only agriculture, people, not only in it's not just agricultural skills and ability that would be taken, but the ability to do them in a pre-technological, in a pre-modern way, using horse-drawn animals, using, not trusting on running down to Home Depot or to Lowe's to buy everything you need, or to an agricultural supply store. There is no agricultural supply store. You do have some resources. You have the guy who makes harness. You have the guy what can you give him? What can you trade to them? Because they want something too. They got to feed their families. They got to get through the got to get through the situation as well. But I think that is uplifting. We like seeing the development of new relationships. We like seeing people who finally start to have babies. We like to see people adapting, modern people like the Weisses adapting in different ways to the new realities. I like to see candidly, I like seeing in this scenario, in your new communities, you have a lot of people from different backgrounds getting together and getting along with each other. You got the Amish and the Mennonites who, as we learn in reading your books, they have their differences and their frictions with each other, plus within each group, old order, new order. You have them getting along with with non-religious folk or what was the word you
Non-Anabaptist.
used? Non-Anabaptist folk like yourselves, with city people like and Jews like the Weisses, with certain outsiders like
The Mormons.
what is the name
Quakers.
of the in your second book? Is it's the professor?
Oh, Roger Little.
Roger, so somebody who's a professor. These people all, people from different backgrounds they're the lucky few in terms that they've gotten to a place where they can, but they also learn how to work with each other and find each other's strengths and to appreciate each other's.
And I want to set religious people, not against, but in contact with secular people and have them talk about what's important to them and how they arrived at their conclusions and what it means to them on a day-to-day basis. Because there are things that a community, not a city, has to accomplish. The cities are technological islands. They don't produce food. They don't produce energy. They produce lots and lots of information flying around that then finds its way out to the oil fields and to the corn fields and out to the ocean for where you're fishing and to the woods for your forestry to bring it all into a certain place. But the cities cannot do any of that without electricity. And if you take electricity away, all the rest of the webbing goes away within days. And within 2 weeks, it's irretrievable. So then I wanted to set that scenario against the community ideals of the Anabaptists and the Quakers, who believe that you can rely on your neighbor and you should rely on your neighbor. There should be codependence and interdependence, and everybody has to contribute. So I wanted to set that community ideal against the city competitive environment, and then I wanted to discuss what is the energy input that makes both sides work. The city runs on electricity. The country runs on mechanical power, animal power, human capital, and children and family and community and people. It's a totally different thing. The community here is not concerned with whether we're having a war with Iran, whether Microsoft is having a good year, whether Facebook is snooping on people's data. What we're worried about here is the strawberry harvest, and the peach harvest, and your milk cow, and how is your production doing, and how all that other political shifting and fighting and huffing and blowing doesn't make the corn grow any faster. And so you have to deal with the weather, you have to deal with the cold, with the heat, with the need for fire, with childbirth in less than perfect conditions. I laid all those problems out there so that I could compare the city to a community.
Well, and I think this gets at something. I think probably since about 1970, a lot of in our modern era, there were waves of this before, like with Thoreau, but people fantasized and romanticized the idea of getting back to the land, of homesteading, of leading a more simple but holistic life, which is what you guys are doing out here. And and I think you're really attacking this in earnest, both because you've lived it and watched how other people who are even better at it than you are do it.
It's hard.
It is hard.
It's not easy.
And and those of us in the modern world who've gotten soft and are used to, we buy things with cash, we have conveniences, we have figured out the how to do the most in our lives with the least effort. It's a whole different philosophy and a different way of life. Anyway, moving back to the land, this is something that people have thought about doing, and people are alienated by how by modern society, every aspect of it, and they fantasize about getting back to the countryside and doing something about it. For a lot of people, it doesn't work out, or it isn't what they thought, or it's a lot harder than they thought. But for people who make it work, there is I think wise people have often looked at that the best lives are the ones that are most holistic and integral. That if you are working to create the means for your own survival, if you're working with those closely, that you have firsthand contact with, to cooperate, that this is a good life.
It's an excellent life.
It's removed from. It has its stresses, but it's removed from other stresses of modern life, and the fruits of what you produce are there for you to enjoy, and that that brings you a real satisfaction. You grew the food that you eat. You raise the cattle that become your beef. You planned your life to do the stuff that you need to do for you and your family. You don't have a boss.
That's one of the greater satisfactions. The great satisfaction is no bills in the mailbox. That's the great satisfaction. Yeah, I like the food, but what I like most is when I have a woodshed full of wood, I don't have a propane bill. And when I have a pantry full of food, I don't have a grocery store bill. And when I've got a pump and or rain collection tank, so when the bills go away, life becomes much simpler and much easier. We're not trying to be self-sufficient completely. We want the community to be relatively self-sufficient and trade with the outside world, but some guys are better at harness making and some guys are better at putting metal roofs on buildings, and we kind of work all of that out. And we grow the vast majority of our food, but there's stuff that we buy, and there's stuff that we buy from our neighbors, and there's stuff that they get from us. So on a community level, if you could arrange a community that was self-reinforcing, you are raising your own children with an ethos of the community, not that you're going to go out and conquer the world, but that you're going to raise a family here and that you're going to be good people, good neighbors, and find a way to enjoy your life without making yourself crazy.
Well, and you're also in the city. Sometimes the price of leading a good life there is you have to prey on other people.
Right.
You aren't doing that here.
Right. No, I have no guilt whatsoever about having to fleece somebody. There's no temptations here like you experience in the city. So we don't have surgeons doing surgery on people that don't need surgery. We don't have ambulance chasing lawyers. There is some freedom in that. There's some ethical freedom.
I think you mentioned to me earlier that one of your Mennonite friends supports a family of 15 on $680 a month because of the lifestyle, everything that they produce for themselves.
Well, they own the land.
The things that they eschew in terms of modern conveniences and pleasures and enjoyments, they aren't partaking in a lot of that anyway. Right. But they also don't think they need to, and they have created a life where they don't need them.
They're not poisoned by media. If you're not subjecting yourself to media every day telling you that you are ugly, that you are poor, that you are oppressed, if every day you're only confronted with people who are patting you on the back and telling you that they value you and are happy to have you around, life is very pleasant. And when you're not materially competing with your neighbor over, look at my watch, look at my car, look at my house, you'll notice in the community all the houses are white. A lot of the men don't even have a pocket here, because that way they can't put a pen in there to compete with the other guy who might not be able to afford. Now, you might think that's taking it too far.
Is that actually a deliberate statement to not have a pocket?
It's a deliberate
because
statement.
some of your friends might not be able to afford pockets.
Or no, not be able to afford the pen that goes in there or whatever else did. Now, that's an older thing. The newer, younger guys have a pocket because they want to have a pen. But it used to be that was the level of the rejection of competition, of material competition. The women don't wear makeup. They don't dye their hair. Now, that would be very hard in our society because, to accept your gray hair, we do,
right.
And it's not a big deal. So the women don't wear makeup, and the men wear long sleeve shirts, and it's very light in the summertime. But they dress very modestly. They're not looking for a new wife or a new husband. They're not looking to break up their families. They're not looking to compete. They're not trying to show you I've got this and you have that, and I'm better than you. And so. And sometimes it's taken a little too far, but if you look at the outcome, as my friend Lester you met today, who I base all my characters on, said to me one day, is in our community we have 150 people, 150 families, 1,500 people. We've never lost anyone to a drug overdose. No one's ever been arrested. We've never had a divorce. We've never had any domestic violence that I know of. We don't have any drug addiction or alcoholism. Nobody's been arrested for DWI. What would happen in your community with 150 families? What would your numbers look like compared to that? And it was a stunning analysis. Yeah, they eschew a lot of things that make life easier. On the other hand, they don't lose any of their children in car accidents. So you have to decide what level of comfort and convenience you're willing to live without, or what you demand, and that you're going to give up people in car crashes. You're going to give up people in addiction problems, and you're going to give up people in suicides or all the modern afflictions. it's a tough conversation to have within a family, within a community, and within a culture. But we have it all the time, and this was what we chose.
Well, it's nice to see a functioning people whose culture is several hundred years old and have been making it work. It's a stable, steady state thing. You know it works.
Right.
It's not like a bunch of hippies who decide they're going to go and reinvent civilization and move out to a farmhouse someplace, and a year later it's all gone to hell because none of them have any idea what to do. They haven't figured out things like stabilizing marital relationships, having kids, how it all works. They're just going to get back to the land. And of course, most of those people failed miserably.
They don't have children.
Right.
We all get old, and we all get too old to work the land. So your children have to pick up the slack when you enter the age of irrelevance or when you become elderly. The community we visited today has, like I said, they have 150 families, but those families have been part of that community in America for 15 or 18 generations.
Wow.
It's a powerful statement when you see them there and you see how well they are. I mean, they just look healthy. Obesity is not a big problem in that community.
They all work hard.
It's not
and
just
they don't overeat.
It's all over there. You see it on their countenance, you see it on their face, and you can see it in their physiques. They look well.
Do Mennonites, I have to ask you this, do Mennonites get ice cream?
Every day. They're big ice cream consumers.
They make their own?
No, they'll buy it and they make it.
Just curious.
But they do make it. They make it with salt.
Oh, you use the whole thing with rock salt.
And they have
grinder.
A horse grinder, and the horse works in circles, and it works.
They actually have the horse. They do it on larger quantity with the horse driving.
10 gallons or 20 gallons.
A horse-driven ice cream maker.
Yeah,
I love it.
Oh, and it's impressive. What they get horses to do is impressive. It's not just for buggies. Their horses provide mechanical power that run their sewing machines, run their washing machines, run their sawmills.
You showed me some of their different methods for using horse powers.
Mechanical energy, the way they capture mechanical energy with draft power is impressive. Their ability to work gears, to step gears up and step gears down so the power output where you need it is steady and consistent
I'm fortunate that in my life I've had a couple of different experiences with rural and rural primitive, shall we say, living. One is this. One is, I don't want primitive is a bad word. One was my...
primitive's a good word. This is primitive.
Okay.
Yeah, we live primitively.
One is my experience in Peace Corps living in a rural village in Senegal with Muslims who were polygamous, who were farmers. Seeing how they lived, I came to understand a lot of things, but like key among them was an African village was a much better place to raise a child than your typical American suburb is. The people don't have a lot but share everything that they've got. People are never lonely.
That's a big one. People are never lonely.
People are never lonely. They face challenges in life, and there are dysfunctions in that society in terms of it's poor. People have enormous extended family. Anybody who makes it has 300 people coming to them and saying you need to share that with me, and which is why a lot of them they will choose to emigrate to the United States because they need to get away from that.
Right.
They can't accumulate.
But then they give up everything else they had. They give up that.
Right.
Then they become here and they become rich and they become lonely.
Right.
Where we're not lonely out here. We have large families and stable marriages, and we're not lonely. Where if you go to the cities in America, people are, they've got work families. Those are not real families. They're not the people.
No, they're not. They dissolve as soon as you leave your job.
They dissolve, and they dissolve the moment there's any adversity. If you get sick, if you lose your job, if anything goes wrong in your life, poof, those people are gone. Where in these communities here, most of the households have at least 3 generations, and often 4, because they start having their children so young.
Right.
Their great-grandparents by 70.
Somebody 70 or 80 is great-grandparent. Right, sure.
Right. And they invariably live on the property. So a typical socioeconomic strategy in these communities here, along I-65 corridor, from Alabama up to Indiana, is when the youngest son is old enough to marry, he moves into the main farmhouse. The oldest son is probably already closing in on 50, so he can't wait around for this.
I'm sorry, when the oldest son...
The youngest son... is, or the youngest daughter's husband is ready to take over. The old folks move into what they call a dowdy house. They build them a little house, a little cute cottage.
The youngest son, not the oldest.
Not the youngest, because the oldest son is already 50.
Okay.
Or they get married at 20. They have their first child right away. And so when they're ready to retire at 70, and the youngest son is ready to take over. The oldest son, he's already a grandfather, and he's already, so they have an economic strategy for getting their children started, and not being in debt, not being controlled by debt. So would be hard for outsiders to understand. The boys start working at 14. They finish their schooling at grade 8. Their schooling is much more intense. Geometry, English and Low German, and reading, writing, and arithmetic, but geometry is very important because they're big on building. They have to build barns, they got to build houses, they have to make cuts. So their mathematics is really very good, and they start working at 14. By the time they're 18, they are men. They're not childish guys drinking beer around a keg at a frat party. They are hardened men. They know they have to get up in the morning, they have to make money, they have to save money. They know they have to provide for a wife and children. They know they got to plant a garden. They know they got to cut wood for the next winter. They're already thinking ahead, not just 1 year. They're thinking ahead for their 10 kids that they're going to have. It's a totally different planning.
So when the youngest son is old enough, when he is married,
when he marries,
the parents move into the
dowdy house.
Into the dowdy house, and who gets their house? The youngest son.
The youngest son, and he buys out. He pays off the other children, his older siblings,
for their share of it.
For their share, and he gets a slightly better deal because he's going to take care of the old folks, right? And so the old folks have company,
and they get the one who's also got the longest life in front of them to care for them the longest.
Right. Yep. And they have a lot of children. So they move around. And we watched our neighbors here who had no children, and he had a twin brother who had passed away. And when he got too old to work, he went to live with one of his sons.
One of his twin brothers' sons.
The one that passed away. He had no children of his own, so he went to live with his nephew. And we see them all the time. They have a nice little dowdy house over there, and they have company, and they have things to do. And the woman is involved in all the children's lives. She gets to be the step-grandmother and great-grandmother.
Well, sometimes the men keep working just because if they still feel like it.
They participate in whatever they wish to. They're not once
they don't have
to. Over 70, they're just whatever they feel like doing. So they're retired, but they've made their contribution to the family starting at 14. So they are not expected to kill themselves at 60 and 70. The younger son's supposed to pick up this,
you mentioned we've talked quite a bit about how they make community decisions for health care. They devote their money for health care, what they've got for children, and I guess for their parents. Not so much for old folks. They don't spend a lot on old folks.
They don't spend much on health care, period.
But they still have fairly good lifespans, yes?
Their lifespans, according to Ohio State, they live longer than the average English, which is the average non-Anabaptist, European descended American. They have longer lifespans in spite of the fact that they don't participate in Social Security, Medicare, or health insurance.
I was going to ask, they don't do Social Security?
Or Medicare.
How are they exempt from it?
They have a 1955 Supreme Court ruling that exempts them from participating.
They don't pay into it, and they don't get a pension.
And they don't pay, and they don't collect. They don't participate in anything where there's an insurance payout because they believe that the Lord will provide through their family and through the community. If they fall on hard times, the community will take care of them. When we moved here, within several months, there was a tragedy, an unimaginable tragedy here. A house burned down, and they lost one of their children. 9 of their children got out safely, and 1 child perished in the blaze. As soon as the police were done with their investigation, within 24 hours, a frame of the house was up because the community took a collection. And then 40 men showed up with the wood and the tool, the nails and the metal roofing, and pow! By evening, you could see, the house.
It had been framed.
It had been framed completely, and by the following day, it had been sheathed. And then the next day, they moved in by the end of the day. So 3 days later, they had their home back. They don't have homeowners insurance. The community got together, took a collection. The men came over, provided all the labor, buried the child. It was a tragic thing, but it was also so instructive about the value of community. And we had a terrible tornado here that wiped out our barn complex. That's the only surviving barn. And the next day, we had 20 Mennonite men come over here and say, "You're okay, we've got this."
Wow.
3 days later, it was cleaned up, solved, the cattle were collected. You can see all my cows out there. They were scattered to the winds, our fences were down, the barns were, the wreckage was everywhere. And so, if I was in the city, would anybody help me like that? No, they have to go to work, they've got jobs. And they'd send over hugs and prayers on Facebook. It's a huge difference between a hug and a prayer over internet and somebody showing up with a hammer and a saw and work belt and the ability to put a full day's work in, because they had to pull the nails and collect the wood. It was some job. And that was very instructive for us. You want to shake butter? Yeah.
Would you like me to shake it?
So this is, I don't know, this is a 32-ounce jar, almost filled with cream from our cow.
So should I shake this for your... I'm making butter. I haven't done this since first grade, and was it in first grade with Mrs. Hodeling's class or second grade with Mrs. Brothers' class? I don't recall. But it was sometime around then. And it doesn't take very long. I can feel it already getting solid.
If you shake it hard, it'll probably go pretty quickly there.
Okay, shall I open it?
Why not?
Okay. Ah, lovely. Can I taste?
Sure.
Stick a finger in there.
Show it to the camera.
Tastes like butter. We had a interesting day today. Woke up early in the morning. I think I got up at 6:30 or so. It was already getting light in my room. When you're in the country, you wake up more with the sun. And we had breakfast, and then we got our act together and we took off for our day. Greg had a number of errands to run, mostly concerned with these were not errands. We didn't go to Walmart. We didn't go to the supermarket. First we stopped and we talked with a young boy whose dad was not home, a young Amish or Mennonite. He was a young Amish boy. And Greg was describing what he wanted done with with a piece of farm equipment that carries bales of hay. And it wasn't holding the bales of hay just right. He was discussing with the boy what he was ultimately going to want the boy's father, who works machinery, to do. Then we went to another place, another family in that area, and we dropped off the trailer we'd been using to haul the piece of farm equipment around. Then we went to a third place, and there we met Freeman was his name, I believe, and he is a machinist, and Greg was discussing with him. First, he wanted to get some stove caps for the roof stovepipes. Couldn't find exactly what he wanted. Then he also saw that Freeman had some wonderful, had constructed this beautiful new tedder, which is this is a horse-drawn piece of equipment in which rolling rakes fluff up cut hay that you have already cut in the field, fluff it up so that it'll dry quicker. This allows you to harvest it, to bale it faster. It reduces your window of vulnerability for having the hay destroyed by rain. If you've cut it but not yet, it hasn't dried yet, you haven't been able to bale it. Greg got into some dickering with Freeman about how much it might cost if, in principle, he were interested in buying this, and what he might get in trade-in for his old one, which is smaller. He was looking at like, this is a guy who wanted to buy a bigger car, more power, and so there was some negotiating that took place. The deal is probable but not necessarily concluded. From there we went on and we saw I believe it was Lester, to whom Greg wanted to introduce me to him because he's the basis for one of the main characters in his books. He also needed to drop off some harness to get it fixed. And we spent some time in his shop and we chatted with his brother-in-law who was visiting from Texas, from a New Order Mennonite community, and we chatted about the weather and about tornadoes and construction that you can do that will protect buildings from tornadoes. Let's see, after that, where did we go? I think after that we went and had lunch, and we went to the Amish Country Market, which is both a country store and also they make sandwiches and lunches. We had a very pleasant lunch there. Did a little shopping. We stopped back at the home of the first boy. Was he Jake? And to talk to his father about the hay bale hauling piece of equipment. And Greg nailed down with him exactly what he wanted. I think that I've left maybe one household out of this. We drove by a number of places. He pointed out to me places that figured in his novels, the roads that he was recreating, some of the events that he had. He pointed out the pond, this beautiful man-made pond that someone has built to create his own water supply as well as hydropower. He can release water from the pond to create hydroelectric power. He also has a huge reservoir that he can pump the water up to the to other water reservoirs higher on the hill. From there, they can water fields. They can use it for the house. He pointed out things like this to me in the community, and we talked about many and sundry things all day long. We didn't get home till about 4 o'clock.
So, thank you.
You are
Thank
quite
you for
welcome.
coming.
Are we done?
We're done.
Okay.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful review. Dan Berger, formerly of the Tampa Tribune.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.